From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, K-State's Doug Jardine will advise you corn and soybean growers to test your fields for nematodes ahead of planting. He'll explain why, and he'll talk about the heightened value of using a fungicide seed treatment on soybeans this year, given the seed quality issues resulting from last fall's harvest complications. Then K-State's Gretchen Sassenrath will talk about how a particular mustard species, when planted as a cover crop, can serve as a defense against charcoal rot disease in soybeans. That research recently earned national acclaim. And later on, K-State's Charlie Lee will talk about the best means of controlling beaver damage to farm pond water outlets. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. Well, it's time to put some attention toward disease management in our row crops as we hopefully will get into planting time here soon. We've invited back by row crop disease specialist Doug Jardine, K-State Research and Extension, with a few things, Doug, that you think growers could do at this time to prepare for the growing season ahead. And let's start on the corn and soybean side and nematode problems that might well up. We talk a lot about the soybean cyst nematode, but there is the corn nematode to account for, too.
Right. The primary nematode issue in corn is it's called the root lesion nematode. And we know that especially in northeast Kansas, Donovan County, going along the Nebraska border over towards Maryville, we have fields that have extremely high levels in pockets in the field. So, those fields that we identified last year are likely to be in soybeans this year, but the fields that were in soybeans last year, I'm going to assume that some of those have very high levels of root lesion nematode. And then when we come back and plant corn this year, if we're in that corn-soybean rotation, that we're going to have some issues. Springtime soil sampling can be predictive of whether you're going to have a problem or not. But we're rapidly running out of time before the corn starts going in the ground up there, so there may not actually be enough time to get the samples collected, given the wetness of the soils, get them into the lab, and get your results. Having said that, there aren't a lot of great management choices. Some of the seed treatment nematicides, although they've shown in our university testing somewhat inconsistent results, that certainly would be something to look at. We talked a lot about growers, and it may in some ways seem like we're going backwards, but counter-insecticide nematicide is still available, still labeled for nematode control. The caveat to that is that most of our modern planters don't have insecticide boxes on them because we've gone to seed treatment insecticides for our seedling and insect problems. But if there was an old 8-row planter in the fence row somewhere that had insecticide boxes that could be rejuvenated a little bit, that is clearly an option that they could use. Or if they could figure out some way to, get boxes onto their current day planters, that would be an option. But we kind of leave that up to them. Extended rotations might be a way to go, but if the crop they're extending it with is soybeans, we also have soybeans. There's nematodes in those fields. So really, like going to 2 years of soybeans is not a good management option. But short of that preseason sampling, actually the best time to determine what kind of nematode problems you have in corn is about 30 days after emergence. And so if you're planting, say, the 1st of May, around the 1st of June, you actually take whole root samples and send them into the diagnostic lab. And that's where we can get a very accurate estimate of just how much yield, if any, you may be losing to those nematodes. So that's just something for the corn growers to be thinking about.
And you would like corn growers to account for that nematode problem. It's still relatively new compared to our struggles with soybean cyst nematode.
Well, I think as we've gone to shorter rotations or continuous corn, it's a problem that we've seen grow. And we did some surveys several years ago, and it's equally a problem on wheat. And so wheat does not make a good rotation crop with the corn from that standpoint. So, but you got to know you have the problem first. So the diagnostics is the main thing. Soil samples before planting are useful, but those root samples about a month are really the way to go if you want to know for sure.
And to soybean cyst nematode, same notation here, testing before planting would be advantageous.
Well, the thing with soybean cyst nematode is actually any time of the year you can get out in the field is actually a good time. Some of the listeners may be aware that at winter soybean meetings we had a big push this year on soybean cyst nematode education. We had a program back in the mid-'90s called the Soybean Cyst Nematode Coalition, which was a group of university extension services, private industry companies, and checkoff dollars to the United Soybean Board. We developed an education program over a 2 or 3 year period and really pushed that. 20 years later, we've kind of reinstituted that, and we're just calling it Soybean Cyst Nematode Coalition 2.0. And so I spent a significant time this winter talking about soybean cyst nematode. We gave away some free soil sample test kits as part of that promotion. So if there's any of those growers or co-op agronomists out there listening that had those sample bags, you need to think about when you're going to take that sample and send it in. But yes, now if you can get out in the field, if the fields are dry enough to make it easy to soil sample and before you start planting, that's a great time to do it. If you found that you had extremely high numbers, then you may want to make a last-minute decision not to put soybeans in that field, and it would be, depending on where you're at in the state, whether it's your choice to go a second year of corn or grain sorghum or something else. You have time to do that. But soil sampling can be done in mid-season. If you've got a part in the field that just doesn't seem to be performing quite as well as you think it should be, you could go out and sample from the growing crop. We typically say the best time is after harvest, when the stubble rows are still there. Typically, once harvest is over, growers have more free time to do those kinds of things. Whenever you do the sampling, it's always best to take the cores from directly in the rows, whether it's the currently growing row or the stubble row, because that's honestly where the nematodes are going to be. If you're in 30-inch rows and you take them 15 inches in between, you're probably going to miss them. Sometimes the way the nematode aggregates in the soil, moving that soil probe just an inch or two can make all the difference in the world between having a negative test and having one that's moderately high. So more soil cores are better. If there's a downtime to springtime sampling, it's that you're probably sampling in a field that's coming out of something besides soybeans. And so those old stubble rows may not be visible, so it becomes a little haphazard as to whether you're going to be able to find them out there or not. Entryway to fields are always a good place to start looking, or any place water tends to collect in the fields, or any places where your yield monitors maps may show that yields were down the previous time soybean crops were grown. Those are all great places to be checking. Again, if the test comes back negative, well, you're good to go and you'll sleep easy at night. If it's a positive test, depending on level, you still may be good to go. If it's a really low level, as levels get higher, then there's some other management decisions that you might need to make. One thing we always encourage producers to do is never plant the same soybean variety in the same field twice.
That would be an initial thought, to vary up your variety selection.
Yes, because currently all available soybean varieties have some level of soybean cyst nematode resistance in, but some have much higher levels than others. Growers typically don't know. Actually, the breeders often don't know. And so by chance, you may have had a more susceptible variety in that field last time that caused your levels to get up. Then you want to rotate to a different variety and maybe bring those levels down. If your levels were down, you still want to rotate to a different variety, because growing the same variety time after time can select out for nematodes that happen to like that variety. So we would encourage them to do that.
Know what your nematode status is in your fields, corn or soybeans. In our remaining time, Doug, you have on your mind concerns about seed quality coming out of this past fall's harvest, and how that might open up the potential for disease troubles, leading to the recommendation about seed treatments, right?
Absolutely. And I think anybody that grew soybeans in east central, northeast, or north central Kansas realizes we had very low quality beans last year, a lot of purple seed stain, a lot of pod and stem blight. That reduces germination on those soybeans. that becomes a problem. But as the soybean pathologists got together at our winter meetings, this problem was not relegated to Kansas. They had equally poor quality in Nebraska and Missouri and Iowa, into Illinois and Indiana, Ohio. And a lot of places where our seed beans are being grown, the quality was really poor. So having said that, if you've never used a seed treatment before, this might be just the year that you want to use one. And there are a lot of great seed treatments out there. We don't recommend any specific one from a specific company, but you should use one that has 2 or 3 different products combined together so that you have multiple modes of action that are going to work against multiple pests, because we need something in that product that will get the early season Pythium, and we also need something in that product that will get the later season Rhizoctonia. Those are the 2 most prominent diseases that we have here in Kansas. And so those things are out there. Keep in mind that Pythium likes cooler, wetter soils. So those first fields you plant is probably where the risk is going to be highest. Rhizoctonia, on the other hand, likes warmer, wetter soils. So that's going to be more of a problem if we have wet soil conditions as we get into late May or some of our June planted soybeans around the state. One last caution, it's usually a bad idea just to up your seeding rate to try and counterbalance some potential stand losses, because if you use a seed treatment and we have good germination conditions, a lot of those seed comes up and then you're overplanted. And if we get short on moisture later this summer, then you have a problem probably with charcoal rot. Last thing, we know that early planted fields are more susceptible to soybean sudden death syndrome, although research from our Rossville experiment station shows that you're going to get your best yields with early planted soybeans, but use a seed treatment, and the one that's really available is the Ilevo seed treatment, and use that in fields that have a history of sudden death syndrome in them, but plant on time. And beyond that, if you've got multiple fields with sudden death in, plant non-SDS fields first, and then plant the others, but within that time frame that you're looking for.
This may well be one of those years where fungicide seed treatments pay great dividends. Keep that in mind, producers. And Doug, given the conditions out there, it's shaping up to be one of those years where row crop diseases are prominent. We'll see, and we'll have you back soon for an update. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Doug Jardine, row crop disease specialist, K-State Research and Extension, with us on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Welcome back. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network. And next up for you on Agriculture Today, a visit with an individual who's among a group of leading agricultural researchers from around the country who've been recognized in a new report put out by what's called the Supporters of Agricultural Research Foundation. The report is entitled Retaking the Field: Science Breakthroughs for Thriving Farms and a Healthier Nation. And our guest has, in fact, contributed to that effort. She is Gretchen Sassenrath, a research and agronomist for K-State, based at the Southeast Research and Extension Center in Parsons. First of all, we want to congratulate you for being part of this overall report. Gretchen, it's a big deal, isn't it?
Thank you. Yes, it was fun, and I must say, it was definitely a team effort. The other folks that were involved in the research are really important in it, too. So, it was grateful to have them involved. And
we want to acknowledge K-State's Chris Little and Zhao Miao Lin, Craig Rosenbaum, all were involved in this research. Now, this report, before we go any further, you might outline what it is about.
The particular topic that we were talking about in there is different approaches for managing soil. We've all heard the term soil health, but what exactly does that mean? And what the research team is looking at is how to manage soil health to improve productive capacity. So I define soil health as bushels per acre, because that's what we want to get out of the soil. So how functional is the soil health in producing bushels of harvested crop?
Now, that could take any number of directions, but you and colleagues zeroed in on one particular crop and one particular challenge with that crop that we find with some frequency here in Kansas anyway, correct?
Yes, especially in southeast Kansas. We have a lot of problems with charcoal rot. It's endemic to the fields here in southeast Kansas. We have a lot of problems with charcoal rot. In other words, if you go into any field, you're going to find some charcoal rot. It doesn't always cause a yield reduction, but we suspect it's a more common cause of yield reduction than we normally take observations of, because we always find it. It's, like I say, it's endemic. It's always present in the fields. What the charcoal rot does, it's a fungus that grows in the soil, that lives in the soil, and it congests the soybean phloem, xylem and phloem, and the plant cannot get nutrients and water. The charcoal rot grows into the plant and then clogs the recycling system in the plant, and the plant cannot get water and nutrients, and eventually the roots die because they're no longer functioning, and then it reduces yield.
And as you say, sometimes that yield penalty can be pretty hefty if the charcoal rot is highly severe. In
certain years, yes. Charcoal rot tends to be worse in hot, dry conditions, and that's what happens in Kansas in the summer. We get hot and dry, and the charcoal rot grows and infects the soybean plants. So you were looking for, in effect here, a biological control for at least bringing charcoal rot in check. You used a mustard plant for this purpose, correct? Yes, that's right. And this is not the normal mustard weed that Dallas Peterson is always warning people to control with herbicide. This is a particular mustard that's been bred. It actually is the mustard that is used as a condiment to make the mustard that we put on our hot dogs and so on. A yellow mustard, and it has a high glucosinolate concentration. And that glucosinolate is that tang that we like in mustard. The glucosinolate is produced in the mustard plant, and it tends to control, it acts as a biocontrol of the charcoal rot fungus in the soil. And that's what this research has been looking at, is how to do a natural control of the charcoal rot fungus, because it is present everywhere in our soils down here. So this mustard puts out natural chemical agents which counteract the effects of the fungus charcoal rot. Yes, that's right. It's been shown in some other systems to improve the overall soil health. And the approach that I'm taking about it is more of a holistic approach. Kind of if a person's healthy, they might come in contact with people with a cold, but they won't get sick themselves because they're overall healthy. That's the approach I'm taking with soil health. Mm-hmm. If we support the soil in a positive way with positive microbes and things that they need, it improves the overall soil health, and the soil will be able to better manage diseases that are naturally there all the time. And that's what we've been able to do with the mustard, is control the charcoal rot in a more natural way than using fungicides. Well, talk of the experiment itself then, and you used 5 different treatments here, testing this mustard cover crop for its capacity to suppress charcoal rot. Yes. So we plant the mustard seed about this time of year, a little bit later. The mustard doesn't quite like cold temperatures, so we need it to be a little bit warmer. We plant it in the spring, then let the mustard grow, and then in this particular experiment, we did 5 different management methods of managing the mustard residue to see how it would impact the charcoal rot. And this research has been supported by the Kansas Soybean Commission. This is actually the second cycle of experiments that we had. We first demonstrated that the mustard does control charcoal rot, reduces the incidence of the disease. So now we wanted to understand what we need to do to manage the mustard seed residue to improve the charcoal rot. And what we did with this, like I say, we had one control treatment that had no mustard seed at all, and then we did different ways of managing the mustard residue, either planted into the standing mustard seed, so in other words, we didn't chop it or cut it at all. We mowed it. We also did one tillage pass where we incorporated the mustard residue into the field and then looked at the reduction in charcoal rot in the soybean plants for these different treatments. And it was really interesting what we found. The more we chopped up the mustard seed, the worse it was at reducing the charcoal rot. So you might think that by chopping it up and incorporating, you're getting more of the glucosinolate into the soil. But actually, in fact, the tilled treatment had more charcoal rot in it than the less broken up mustard seed. So if we just rolled the mustard cover over top of the soil and planted straight into that, that was the best at maintaining or reducing the charcoal rot.
So again, to stress, you want to leave the mustard plant intact as much as is feasible to plant a crop within it and still get the benefits of that charcoal rot suppression.
Right. And the mustard's a very fine plant, if you will, so it doesn't have a lot of residue. It's not a tough or fibrous plant at all, so it's very easy to plant into it. It didn't take a lot. There's not a huge amount of residue. We had a good cover of the mustard, but it's, like I said, it's a fairly delicate plant, so it's not difficult to plant into it. So we just laid it on top and planted into it, and that was the best at suppressing the charcoal rot.
Gretchen, you took it one further then, as naturally a producer would be inquisitive about the eventual yields from those various treatments. You examined that, did you not?
Yes, we did. We did look at yield. So we have two sites, both here at Parsons and then also at Ashland Bottoms, just outside of Manhattan. And we saw similar things at both locations as far as controlling charcoal rot, but we saw a complete difference with the response to the tillage. In Manhattan, the tillage reduced yield, and in Parsons, it increased yield. And we think what's happening there, it's not because of the mustard seed, but it's because of the water. So in southeast Kansas, we seem to have a lot more rain, and because of the very wet soils, tillage actually helped dry it out and increase yield. The opposite happened in Manhattan. So we actually saw a slight yield reduction in Manhattan because of tillage and an increase in Parsons. Not a very significant amount. Most of the other treatments were identical. Wasn't a huge increase in tillage, and it probably is going to be very year-dependent. But again, that the yield response to tillage was not because of the mustard, but because of the tillage.
The takeaway here is that a cover crop such as mustard could serve favorably for a producer in dealing with this particular disease, and it does have a future in that respect then.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing, too, is we're interested in looking at sudden death syndrome and nematodes, because it's also been suggested that the mustard can control those or have some impact on preserving yield when those are present.
Well, it's great work, and it has opened some possibilities up in dealing with this particular disease in soybean production, and maybe has thrown the door open for other possibilities here. Good luck with furthering this work, Gretchen, and congratulations for having it cited in this major report that was put out recently. Looking forward to further results as they come on down the line, and we appreciate your time right here.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
She's a research agronomist based at K-State's Southeast Research and Extension Center in Parsons. That's Gretchen Sassenrath. On controlling soil-borne disease in soybeans, particularly here, charcoal rot, with a mustard cover crop. You're tuned to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back with more in a few moments on the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you, and with today's agricultural news headlines for you in brief now, courtesy and part of DTN. And starting with this week's Kansas Crop Progress and Condition Report from the USDA, our topsoil moisture supplies in the state as of this past weekend at 36% surplus and 63% adequate, only 1% short to very short. Subsoil moisture at 26% surplus, 72% adequate, and 2% short to very short. The state of the Kansas winter wheat crop, 55% good to excellent, 36% fair, and 9% poor to very poor. And believe it or not, some corn was planted this past week, but only a minuscule amount, 1% in the ground now. That is very near the 5-year average for this day. Nationally, the winter wheat crop condition is doing better now than during the same time last year, as we hear from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey has the first look at winter wheat condition for the year.
And the news overall is pretty good. We have winter wheat rated 56% good to excellent, just 9% very poor to poor.
He compares this favorably to the same time last year.
Just 32% good to excellent a year ago, 30% very poor to poor, but also better than 2 years ago, which was a decent crop. At that time in 2017, we were looking at 51% good to excellent, 14% very poor to poor.
The only state reporting drought is Texas.
We actually have some bigger issues in the Mid-South through the lower Midwest. It was kind of a tough winter there. We did have some exposure to extreme cold and some other issues such as extreme wetness, poor establishment, and late planting.
As a result, he says the lowest winter wheat condition numbers are coming out of states like Michigan and Ohio. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
How have U.S. agricultural products been doing on world markets? We have new export numbers on that from the USDA. Here's Gary Crawford.
We finally have January's U.S. ag trade numbers, and despite tariffs and other trade problems, at least we started this calendar year fairly strong.
Our trade numbers are up 4% from January 2018 at $11.9 billion.
Now, that's just for January, and USDA trade economist Cameron Doherty says if you look at the fiscal 2019 numbers, that's October through January,
we're seeing numbers down 6% at $47.5 billion.
And the overall U.S. export situation?
There's a reoccurring theme with soybeans taking a hit.
And corn making a hit. First hour soybean exports through January down 42% in dollar value at $6.8 billion. However,
corn is up 65% at $3.5 billion.
Wheat exports running 24% ahead of a year ago, cotton down 12%. Meanwhile, on the import side, U.S. ag imports continue to climb, leaving the January U.S. ag trade surplus less than half what it was a year ago. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
And this spring, the Kansas Department of Agriculture will be hosting 8 regional workshops to assist you livestock producers with emergency preparedness, learning what precautions you can take to protect your herds and to respond if you do suffer losses to natural disaster or disease. These will take place in the following locations on these dates: Tuesday the 30th of April, Great Bend; Wednesday the 1st, Montezuma; Monday, May 6th, Olathe; Tuesday, May the 7th at Mankato; Wednesday the 8th of May in Goodland; Monday, May 13th in El Dorado; Thursday, May 16th in Iola; and lastly, Monday, May the 20th in Manhattan. All of these are free. If you'd like to learn more about them, go to agriculture.ks.gov/emergency management, agriculture.ks.gov/emergency management. Now this week's Milk Lines with K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I want to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning the animals that are in the pre-fresh pens today on your dairies. You know, many of us today on our dairies across the state of Kansas feed these animals a very specialized diet. Large majority of that diet is actually forages, and in many cases it may contain quite a bit of straw or some warm season grass, as well as maybe some corn silage and then a little bit of concentrate. However, as we go into the spring, we're probably maybe running low on some of our forage supplies, and maybe the quality of some of those forages has decreased as well, depending on how it was stored over winter. Particularly those forages that were stored outside maybe on the ground, hopefully covered, but still there could be some issues that we might be dealing with. So why am I concerned? Well, in many of these diets, we feed something called DCAD, or we feed specialized salts, which changes the pH of the animal in their body. We do this in order to try to minimize the effects of milk fever once they start lactating. So, why am I concerned? Well, as we get short of forages, and maybe as forage quality decreases, the intake of these animals may decrease, which would cause a situation where we may have to increase the amount of DCAD that we're feeding, potentially, or we may have to decrease it depending on what the actual impact on intake might have been. Some other things that we need to consider is that we may be changing the forages that we feed these animals. When we change forages, likely the nutrient content of those forages is not the same as the forages that we had been feeding. As a result of that, there may be a change in the potassium content of the forages. If the potassium content goes up, that means that our DCAD balance probably gets closer to zero or maybe even goes positive, since potassium is a major one of the cations that we count. So, have you and your nutritionist taken this into account as you've made these changes in forages? Or have you sampled these forages that we're feeding to these animals pre-fresh to make sure that the mineral levels are similar to what they were when the rations were originally formulated? One of the best ways to keep up with changes in forages and other changes in our pre-fresh animals is to perform urine pHs on a group of the animals. Usually you want to take a urine pH of at least 10 animals in the group, preferably animals that have been on the DCAD diet, been in that pen for at least a week, but no more than about 10 days to 2 weeks. Those pHs should be lower than what we would normally expect. For Holsteins, they should fall into the range of 6.0 to 6.8. If you're feeding Jerseys, 5.8 to 6.5. If they're not at these levels, at least 80% of the group that you test, you may need to consider changing some things in the diet. So it's time to visit with your nutritionist. It's also time to get current forage analysis so that we can do an adequate job of balancing the diet correctly for what we're trying to obtain in the pre-fresh diet. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to take a look at the diets they're currently feeding and perform some urine pHs on their pre-fresh animals.
Thanks, Mike, and you're listening to Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggle to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today and welcoming in once more Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist with K-State Research and Extension, taking up another topic in the area of wildlife management. This week, Charlie, more on beaver control. This has been a cause for a lot of folks with ponds and other water structures out there. Some background, though, the pros and the cons of the beaver, and there are things in each category.
Yes, the dams that are created by American beavers are associated with positive and negative values. Currently, we have beaver throughout the state. With beaver comes that controversy. Some people appreciate those values, and some people are concerned about them plugging culverts, dam spillways, and flooding areas that they intend to crop or backing water over roads.
We do want to speak to the problems and how to address them, but one other positive of beaver activity is they can actually, you say, promote riparian growth around eroding streams?
Yeah, beaver do have a tremendous impact on ecosystems. One thing that they do is slow down the flow of rivers and flood acreage behind it. Those dams prevent erosion. They raise the water table. As that sediment and debris builds up behind a dam, the carbon increases and breaks down and nitrogen decreases. That chemical change there behind those dams does alter the foods, the invertebrates. New water sources are available. But one thing that many people don't realize is they often dam the lowest parts of that watershed. But as that water level builds up, the water table rises. So now we've got a wider area that's inundated other than just the stream channel itself. And so instead of flowing down the center of the valley, that water infiltrates over the river banks and flows underground towards the sides of the valley, and that raises the water table, so it sustains those plants and animal life that's really important in dry summer conditions within that riparian zone.
However, again, their activity can go beyond what a landowner would prefer and cause damage problems to water structures. So approaches to controlling that damage, it's about managing water flow, you say?
Yeah, usually it's some sort of a fence system or guard that needs to be installed into a pipe or a culvert. Beaver typically see a dam as a good structure that just has a hole in it, and they're trying to plug that hole so that they can raise the water level. People have been looking at various devices to manage water level behind beaver dams for many years, and most of those are some sort of a fence system or guard to prevent beaver from stacking sticks and mud and stones in front of a tube that's been installed to allow water to leave a dam or move from one side of the road to the other. Typically, those fence systems are something that's guarding the culvert. That can be just a wire mesh that's in front of the culvert. Those typically plug very quickly, either from debris being washed down into the watershed or by beaver themselves plugging that. There's also been various other types of systems that have been put in place over those culvert ends or spillway ends. Some of those are more effective than others. I encourage people to keep in mind that even a well-designed system is going to need some maintenance. Plan on 3 or 4 times a year of removing some of the debris that beaver have deposited there around the inlet part of the pipe. There have been some folks that have used wire mesh or chains with one end of it hooked back up on the roadside or up on top of the dam so they can hook onto it with heavy machinery and just kind of pull the entire works of the beaver dam away from the opening of the pipe. But I think probably a better approach is to use what's often referred to as a trapezoidal design in front of the inlet to a dam spillway or to a road culvert.
And describe that if you would.
Well, be trapezoidal shaped with the narrow end no wider than the outlet on your pond or your road culvert. So it would be narrow next to the dam, would go out at an angle. I like to see those 3 legs then of the triangle with the part out in the furthest upstream in the stream bed being at least 10 feet in length, and the sides that are on the angling away from the culvert be 10 to 12 foot in length as well. It's usually 6 by 6 inch wire mesh, often concrete reinforcing wire, or I prefer livestock panels that may be about 5 foot in height, can be put up with either wooden or steel T-posts. That particular design has 3 reasons that it seems to be more effective than just a single guard across the flat part of the culvert, in that it's much more surface area for beaver to plug. So you've probably tripled or quadrupled the linear feet of dam that beaver would have to construct. Second, beaver are often attracted to the sound of moving water, so when they hear that sound or feel that current or those whirlpools around there, they're depositing debris to try to plug that. So if you have a wider surface area that reduces that water movement and speed, beaver are less likely to try to plug it. And then third, it's just much wider area. It's deeper. It's just a lot more area for beaver to try to plug. And we've had fairly good success with using those trapezoidal shapes at preventing beaver from plugging culverts in watershed ponds or around culverts. There are lots of other types of designs. We've talked before in past programs about a device called the Clemson Beaver Pond Leveler. That's just a straight tube that's put through the pond dam, the beaver dam. The upstream portion of that then has a perforated pipe, and surrounding that perforated pipe then there is another wire guard. If you have enough perforation sticking up above there, then beaver are not able to sense that water movement or feel that water movement and simply do not plug the Clemson Beaver Pond Leveler. There's no one single approach. We've found that those trapezoidal shapes are about 97% effective. Annual trapping seems to be only about 16% effective at controlling the damage. So if we can keep beaver in an area and reduce the damage, I think it's kind of a win-win for everyone.
Once again, Charlie, thanks for the information on beavers, their activity, and means of dealing with their damage to water structures. Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Our time's away for today. As always, thanks for listening in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.